Well, hello and welcome. We are back with our monthly discussion series, Let's Talk About Race. I'm Keira Sorrells, the Executive Director and founder of the NICU Parent Network, joined as always by my amazing friend and colleague, Gigi Khonyongwa-Fernandez, who is the founder of GKF Coaching and Consulting. And she is also our current NPN Board President and has been with me for over a decade in building this network. So it's great to see you. You know, we always take a little break for the summer, and you've had lots of amazing travels and experiences, and just really excited to have this conversation with you, especially as we're getting geared up for our return to in-person events.
Yes.
And we
Yay.
really, we've been really intentional in our conversations and our planning about creating a space and an event where people know that they belong, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what their life experience is, what their NICU experience, bereavement experience, however they show up to support or advocate families. And so I'm really excited to talk today because we're going to be talking about inclusive spaces and what those elements of inclusive spaces are.
Yes.
And, I'm just, this series is for leaders, right? For NICU parent leaders, for anyone who is leading anything. It could be, it could be, a large or small organization or program or, whatever. But a lot of what we talk about just translates to any situation, any circumstance, whether it's work or personal.
Exactly.
So I'm excited to have this conversation. We've got our keynote is Ruchika Tulshayan, who wrote the book Inclusion on Purpose, an intersectional approach to creating a culture of belonging at work. And I just wanted to read something that I had underlined in her book, because we are talking about exactly that, being intentional, inclusion on purpose. And it starts with the leader, right? And she writes that when leaders employ the principles of cultivating a growth mindset to create equitable workplaces, they can develop an inclusion mindset. She also says that research demonstrates that workplace cultures that value a growth mindset see greater trust, engagement, innovation, and ethical behavior.
So what is your agree.
Yeah.
Agree with all of that. And I love the title about growth on purpose. And that, when you think about growth, when the first thing you said, the image that came to my mind was the leader being the planter. So if you're on a farm and you're a gardener or whatever, you're planting that seed. And so whatever seed you're planting, that's what's going to grow.
Right.
So if you're planting a seed of, of lukewarmness or of,
hierarchy,
hierarchy of toxicity of whatever it may be, it's going to come out. And the thing about that is, whatever you plant is going to come out. So if you're planting a sunflower, it's going to come out something. You can't have half sunflower and have have rose with the thorns. And so I think that goes back to what you said about the intentionality of it. It's making sure that as leaders, you are very clear about that. And that doesn't mean that you have all the answers.
No,
none of us
not.
have all the answers.
Right.
It's a learning process, but it does mean that you are on that trajectory of learning and that you are intentional about trying to create a space. And I like that you said space. I think that's so important. That is spaces and not necessarily workspaces, because it could be that space between you and another colleague, another individual, your whoever you're speaking with, your funders, maybe your hospital, maybe your community, people that you serve. You as a leader have the ability to plant that seed of inclusiveness in any space that you're in, even if that space is within yourself.
Right. Right.
What are you planting within yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and what weeds do we need to remove from that?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and that's always kind of, I guess, difficult for us as humans to do. But in order for the plant to grow, you got to remove those weeds. You need to sometimes you need to clip off. What is that? What is that term? I'm not a gardener at all. In my dreams, I am, but
Pruning.
in
Pruning.
reality,
You have to
pruning.
prune
Thank
your butt. Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Got to prune your
So part
plant.
of that
Mm-hmm.
intentionality, yeah, is about sometimes we may have to do some pruning, some individual pruning, but also um organizational and team pruning.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I guess one of the things I love that you kind of started off with that, and what I would like to share, because one of the things we want to make sure is that you as leaders go away with tangible things to do and to think about.
Right. Right.
And so what I was sharing with Keira earlier was that there are a number of diversity consultant groups that I'm a part of, or work with, or aware of, and one of them is called Diverse Matters, and they put out this sort of um, document around what exactly is an inclusive workplace. They were talking
Right.
about workplace, but we're talking about spaces, but what is it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things we talk about a lot, but we don't really know what we're
What
talking
does it
about.
mean?
So
Right. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. How do we know if
So
we're
they
doing it right, if,
are
or we're doing it well, if we
exactly
don't know exactly what it is that we need to be doing?
right. Right. And so one of the things they shared is about some best practices that we can start thinking about implementing and doing or thinking about when you're trying to create a inclusive space. And I guess
Mhm.
they started off by asking kind of two queries. One was that, what do you expect to see? So when you hear that term,
Mm.
inclusive
Mhm.
spaces,
Mhm.
what does that mean to you? What are your
Yeah.
expectations of that?
When
Um,
I don't know if you're asking me to answer, but I'm gonna
you
answer
can answer.
my
It was a
perspective
rhetorical question, but you
anyway.
can
Yeah.
ask.
Well, I think it's
Yeah.
a good question. I think it's something for people to ask themselves, and if you do work on a team, to ask the the members of your team as well, to see
Hmm.
what does that mean for them. Um, for
Yes.
me, it all inclusivity is so linked in my mind to belonging, and
Mm.
that sense that I belong here, I'm valued, um I'm understood. um you know it's it's a space where um where I can bring as much of myself as I want
Hmm.
to bring. I know we're
Hmm.
going to talk about bringing your
Yeah.
whole self
Hmm.
a little bit later. um but that's kind of what comes up for me just initially. What about for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I think likewise, and I think for me, it's important to ask that query because you remove assumptions. Number
Mm-hmm.
one, but then also, where your starting point is. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes when we're trying to change things, we're going into we're gonna do X, Y, and Z, and this is how we're gonna do
Right.
it. But that brings with it a lot of assumptions. You've taken on
Right.
what you think people are and where you think they are,
Right.
without giving them time and space to actually share themselves.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, we are. So I think for me, yeah, it is about it. It's I like to think of it as a space also that really thrives on and encourages diverse thinking,
Mm-hmm.
diverse behaviors, that diverse
Mm-hmm.
ways of being. And I say that to say because and we talked about this a lot, here. I'm pretty sure it's the same in the US as well,
Mm-hmm.
is with being with the feeling of belonging and alignment and the values and those kinds of things. Sometimes we think that means that we all have to be the same. We all have to think the
Mm-hmm.
same. We all have to
Right.
agree the same. And we don't, because then you're
Right.
no longer diverse. You're just become
Right.
what
Right.
it becomes. But that means though that you can sit with those maybe ideas or thoughts that may prick you a little bit, but they're needed. So I
Right.
think about a rose, for example.
Right.
A
Yep.
rose is beautiful, but a rose has
Mhm.
thorns.
Right.
But a rose won't be a rose without those thorns,
Right.
you know?
Yes,
And
exactly.
so you may, yeah, so you may have a colleague, or you may have, I guess the beauty of people as humans is that we are dynamic, and we can kind of have competing thoughts within our mind, but there's also collaboration within that.
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
that intentionality is saying that, okay, we're going to bring those in, and I may be a little bit pricked, but that's maybe not necessarily a bad thing. Because it is important for all of us to have that ability to be in that space.
Right. Right.
And I think asking yourself and asking your team, what do you expect, is a good starting point.
Right.
Because
For
you
sure.
know what they are, and people going to be at different parts, and we're all going to change as well as we grow and develop.
Yeah.
So and giving people the freedom and space and time to change within that space is important.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to something that
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about a lot in many of these discussions, is the importance of listening first, the power of the pause, as you've said to me many times.
Yes. Yes.
It
And even
really is
to yourself, even
Mhm.
listening to yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
But I think the query for that is knowing that you have a very clear starting point. And that's so important to also prevent you as a leader and as a team from just doing a tick box exercise.
Yes. Right.
And saying we've done this. So asking that query, what do you expect? What policies did you expect? And then also having a very clear understanding of what the consequences are of inappropriate behavior. And that again makes it very tangible, makes it very clear. Everyone knows what the expectations, knows what will happen, and not necessarily in a negative way, but we're talking about growth mindset. Everything that we're doing intentionally is to help us to grow individually, as a team, as an organization. And so even with those things that need to be kind of nipped in the bud, to be, like you said, pruned, is necessary for growth. And that's okay. So one of the things to talk about, so start off with those two queries. What do you expect? And you can either ask both of them, or depending on where you are, just ask one of them. And then they start talking about looking at different elements that need to be in place or need to be considered when you talk about creating an inclusive workspace or creating an inclusive space. And that, again, this is, as leaders. First one it talks about is having evidence of your commitment. And that evidence can be in writing. It could be as part of your values and your missions. It could be the way that you start off, your meetings, or start off, it could be images that you put in your space. It could be a number of things, your tone of voice. So what is that evidence of commitment to DEI and of belonging? Where does that? It makes me think about years ago, because my background is healthcare, and I remember going into a work environment, and the mission statement was HEART, HEART. And to be honest, I don't even know what that stood for. It was plastered everywhere. But it was trying to say that everything we do has heart in it. But because it was not shown, it was not felt, it was not, it just became
words
on a wall and acronyms. Exactly, an acronym. So I think when you're talking about evidence, what is your evidence? And it's important for you as a leader that evidence is not just in writing, that people, you talked about belonging, people feel that belonging. So how will they feel that belonging when they interact with you, whether it's an email, whether it's a telephone conversation, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's a initiative that you're working on, What are they
Right.
coming away with? How do they,
Mm-hmm.
what evidence is it that they're coming away with to know that you're committed to
Mm-hmm.
an inclusive space, an
Yeah.
inclusive
Yep.
interaction? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. And I think it is uh, so important, as leaders to really understand how much you set the tone for
Hmm.
everything else. Even if you have a huge team and you've got
Hmm.
managers and directors under you, it's, you know, what you set as the, the standard of excellence in your program or your work
Yeah.
starts
Hmm.
with you as the leader and trickles down through everything. And
Yeah.
so I think,
Hmm.
when we're looking at, having that inclusive mindset, having that growth mindset, then that's going to be understood, at every level,
Yeah.
we hope.
Exactly. We hope, yeah. And exactly. And I think the other thing they talk about is looking at the health and well-being of your,
Mm,
of your team, of yourself and of your
yeah.
team. So are you, are you overwhelmed all the time? Are you stressed out all the time? Are you unhappy? Are you just kind of, going along with the flow? Do you have a lot of absenteeism? So you have disengagement? All of those things are ways to help you begin to identify whether or not you
Mm,
have an inclusive space and a healthy space where people
hmm.
feel like they want to be there and they belong
Right.
there.
Yeah. That is a really good indicator too. I mean, it's tough to not be overwhelmed, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, just
Yeah. Yeah.
in life in general. I mean, let's be real for a
Mhm.
second.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
particularly when you're looking, at this industry where we're, as parent leaders, we often feel like we're fighting for credibility. And the amount of need in this space for families is just vast. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
huge, and you want to
Yeah.
do as much as you can, but it really, really is important that you understand that your work ethic is also going to affect the work ethic of those people who are working for you, whether they're volunteers, whether they're staff. So if if they're constantly getting, emails from you at 3 in the morning, and then you start off your meetings at 8 a.m. saying, oh my gosh, I didn't sleep last night, you know, it's, it, they're going to expect that that's what they're supposed to be doing
That's the
too.
evidence. Exactly. That's
That's the
evidence
evidence.
given
Yeah.
to them, and that's what you're planting.
Hmm. So what would be evidence that you are, what would be the evidence of an inclusive mindset? What is the evidence as a leader that they should be putting out there for their staff to hear and see? Like, what would you
So
say?
that goes back to whatever answers come from that first query about what
Mm-hmm.
do you expect to see. So
Right.
to take your, but to be given an example, what you just said, like, if you don't want to start off saying, um, I'm tired, I didn't sleep, whatever that day, then you will intentionally flip that. You will
Mm-hmm.
start off with even something like you just did at the last board meeting about what was your, was, I can't remember how you said it, but something about what was it that you feel good about.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, who says that we have to start off the meeting in, in a very,
Already in a, you know,
yeah, in a tizzy,
in a
who
tizzy.
says that we have
Yeah.
to, and who says, it's almost like questioning and pushing back on the status quo. Who
Mm-hmm.
says that we can't have a connection moment before the
Mm-hmm.
meeting? And that
Right.
becomes a part of our culture.
Right.
There was an organization here, small organization, NGO, that for a number of reasons, including COVID, they incorporated they took a month off. And that month off could be anything in the sense of
Mm-hmm.
you may say, I'm going to take a couple weeks here, there. I'm going to go spend time with my family. I'm going to go meditate. I'm going to go do yoga.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to
Mm-hmm.
explain,
Right.
but they incorporated um, time into a part of into the way they roll.
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of evidence. So it's not just about saying. So there, some organizations have sleep pods, larger
Mm,
ones where
yeah.
you can go off and
Take
take
a
your
nap.
10-15, take a
Right.
nap.
Mm-hmm.
Take a nap,
Yeah.
because we know evidence shows that working 8 hours or working 10 hours, does that mean that you're more productive? It just means
Mm-hmm.
you're sitting at the thing, but you're not productive.
Right.
You're most productive in the first 4 to 6 hours of your day.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so it's that's the kind of stuff. So change, the evidence will be the words you use, the things you put in place, the way that you show up,
Mm-hmm.
um, the way things are even set. So are your
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
meetings, are they at a rectangle table, or are they in a circle where
Right.
everyone's on the same? Or do you have meetings where you break out,
Mm-hmm.
that you physically
Right.
break out? Do you have meetings even in the building? Why
Mm-hmm.
not have meetings out in the
Right.
park if you're close to a park?
Yeah.
And those may sound like wooby wooby, sort of things. But there are, people who are considered, I guess, pioneers, which as leaders you are.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
can begin to change that. And you don't
Absolutely.
have to, yeah, you don't have to change everything all overnight, but
Right.
you may start off your conversations with your team or with your funder, about we're just gonna check in. We're gonna do a
Yeah.
connection moment.
Yeah.
And first they're gonna be like, what is that? But there people will respond to it. People respond to
Yeah.
whatever you plan.
Yeah. I love that. It
Um,
also just kind of goes, it makes me think too, as I was thinking, like, what is the evidence that I recognize, like when I, like in working with you? Because, in the work that we've done together, you always create a space of inclusivity. And it's, and so as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, what does Gigi do? And one of the things that you do whenever we work together really in any situation we've ever been in, is
mm,
you're very inquisitive. You don't
oh,
just come to a meeting with an agenda and go "Duh, duh, 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 duh," and just talk at
mm,
everybody. You know, you're
mm,
you want to hear from other people. And that gives us, that gives everyone a chance to be heard. And I think
mm.
that to me, that's something that always resonates with me. And a lot of
Oh,
times I'm going, oh yeah, I should have asked that. I'm glad she asked them that. Because I was just trying to
oh.
perform here for a second. But
My mom calls that that I'm just really nosy, but maybe that's I like the inquisitive and curiosity. But
yeah.
that is a part of those seeds that you're planting, that you
Hmm.
are stopping and being curious about that person. How
Right.
are you?
Hmm.
What's happening today?
Hmm.
And starting off, it's like that centering moment,
Hmm.
that you have a centering moment. And I don't care what position people hold, I don't care
Right.
where they are, they're humans.
Yes.
And all humans want to be seen. All
Yes.
humans want to be heard, want to be listened to, want to be valued. I
Yes.
don't care what position they hold in any
Yep.
place.
Yep.
And so it's about
Agree.
bringing that human element. So what is the
Mm,
evidence of humanity that
mm,
exists within you and
mm,
within your team?
mm. I like that. What is
Um,
the evidence of the humanity within you and your team?
Yes,
I like
yes.
that.
We can change that as a query.
Yeah.
But then but then I want to look, because I want to just pull out, because there are
Yeah.
about things
Yep.
to suggest, but we don't have time for all of them. But I
Yep.
guess in going along with what you were saying is making sure, they talk about having um visibility in this in your senior, in you as a leader. So again,
Hmm.
that you have the evidence that's visible in you,
Hmm.
which is very important,
Hmm.
so that there's not a disconnect between what you say and what you actually do, that the gap is
Right.
doesn't there.
Yep.
And they talk about having very good, effective people policies, and that's very
What does
important. And
that
that
mean? What's a people policy?
you could have policies that are in alignment um, um, with what it means to be human. Goes back. I want to repeat what we
Mm,
just said, but in a way, it's just
okay.
like that. So things like that are compassionate, policies that have structure but flexibility within it. So you don't have
Mm-hmm.
a list of rules that people are going to be doing. You don't have this rigidity, but you do have structure in place to where people kind of know where they're going, but they
Right.
also know they can kind of bounce back. They can
Yeah.
communicate to you. They can maybe challenge, that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I guess, but their thinking with the people policy is also making sure that it's not just geared to one particular group. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have, well, you can have a diversity coordinator, D&I coordinator, a team or whatever, but that person should not be the only one owning that. That
Mm-hmm.
it should you should have a policy that is valuable to all people
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's working
Yeah.
within you with the work within the
Mm-hmm.
organization.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have, you know, uh, a a paid time off policy, just for a certain type of person. That it is
Right.
your policy is going to benefit everyone that works within that space.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
It does. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so they talk about, and people can, there's a bit of, I mean, you can go back and forth with this, but changing, for example, personnel
Mm-hmm.
to people, because again, it
Mm-hmm.
just it's intentionally makes you think about people as people. It sounds
Mm-hmm.
really basic and kind of pedantic, but
Yeah.
it's really about, when you say things, the
Mm-hmm.
way you say things, that's
Yeah.
kind of like when you're driving. If your
Yeah.
eyes veer to the right, you're going to go to the right.
Right.
If your
Yes.
eyes veer to the left, you're going to go to the left. But the same thing with how we speak. And if we're
Mm-hmm.
saying those words, we're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about them a little bit more. So am I thinking about this
Yeah.
person, this policy how is it going to affect the people that it's intended to affect
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
support or benefit?
Yeah.
And then the other part, which you alluded to earlier, was about that we do value and that you as a leader value differences and encourage differences, so that people feel like they can bring their full selves to work. And they say full selves in parentheses, and because sometimes with these phrases it means we unintentionally create spaces where people feel forced
Mm-hmm.
to, I got to put everybody, I need to bring everything there. I need to, and
Right.
that's not really realistic or healthy or doable. And
Right.
sometimes we all know that we don't want to bring everything into that space, and we
Sure.
shouldn't be kind of allowed, forced to. But I think so what it's
Right.
saying is providing that space to where you choose to, you feel safe enough
Yeah.
to bring whatever parts of you that you want to show into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so that that is I think very, very important with the conversation. And so, and that's what they're talking about is and it goes back to what we were talking about with earlier about um all those elements, and even if the ones that
Right.
are a little bit thorny. And we
Mm-hmm.
all know
Right.
there are people that we work with, and I'm pretty sure everyone listening can identify one person where you feel anxiety when you know they're going to be in a meeting with you. You're
Yep.
already prepping. Okay, what am I going to say
Right.
to that? I'm kind of
Yep.
you know, um,
Yes.
and so it's one of the kind of intentional flips on that is to use your point, like how am I going to be curious about that person, because there's
Mm-hmm.
something that they're bringing and there's a reason they're bringing it that way. I'm not
Right.
saying that you allow people to be disrespectful and things, or
Sure.
um but it may be more about when they're bringing that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
pause, tell me more about that. What's
Right.
going on with that? Explain to me more why you're coming back. So it again
Mm-hmm.
allows them, and probably for the first time, for them to pause and say, well, why am I saying that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Right.
flipping it. That's what the intentionality. So, you don't necessarily react in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You act in a different way, that you're saying, I'm going to plant a different seed. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
create a different space, and I'm going to, and maybe that's one of your evidences that we're going to be curious about one another. Um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then the last thing they talk about, that, well, not last thing, but one of the things they talk about is having a zero tolerance to inappropriate behavior. So you as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things you
Right.
plant is the zero tolerance, but there's discussion around what the zero tolerance means for you. So some organizations would say zero tolerance means zero tolerance. But what we're talking about when we're talking about creating inclusive spaces, we know that it's a process. We know that we're all learning. We know that we're going to make mistakes. We know that we may, differ, et cetera, et cetera. And so the zero tolerance may mean for you is that you say, okay, if something happens that is not really in alignment with the space we want to create, then we maybe do training, maybe we do conversations, maybe we do workshop, whatever, for our team, so that people are more educated and more aware about what's happening and why we as an organization don't want to go down that road.
Right.
And then you may say, I don't know, was in baseball, 3 strikes you're out or whatever.
3 strikes you're out, right?
Yeah. But the zero tolerance may not necessarily mean that first time somebody messes up that they're chucked out, because again, we're not allowing them to grow. And I think I've said this to you before as a friend, and it kind of sits with this, is part of that growth process is understanding I think I'm like the reason, season, lifetime. You've heard that before.
Yes.
And so understanding that people within your team may need to be in your team for a season. They may need to be in your team for a reason, and not necessarily a lifetime. And I think some of the ways when we get confused is we put people, we're putting people on our boards, we're putting people in our, in our staff, and et cetera, that and trying to make them lifetime, but they actually need to be there for a reason, which means they may need to be there for one project or for one meeting or for one conversation. And they provided what they needed, and then they've gone on. And I think so these are some of the things that I can share with you. There are about 4 or 5 more, but things you need to be sort of thinking about as leaders, how best practices of how you can actually create more inclusive spaces. So just to recap, we talked about the evidence. What evidence do you have that's showing the commitment? We talked about looking at the wellness of your staff. Are they sick all the time? Are they, are they calling off, not engaging? Are they absent, et cetera? We talked about the zero tolerance and what that means to you as an organization. We talked about the having people policy, which means you have this shared idea and shared values that your policies are human, and they're not just kind of a tick off thing. And then the other thing we talked about is making sure you as a leader that you're visible, that you're showing up in a different way, and you're showing the policy. You're manifesting, the way that you would want that space to look like for yourself and also for your team. And I get the last one is that space is making sure that space has allows people to show up however they want to show up, like they're full, bring whatever parts of themselves they want to bring to that table, and then that's okay.
I love that. And I think I'm sure we will share a link to more information about this when we post the video. But I would love to hear from other folks. Hopefully they'll make some comments about how they're intentionally creating inclusive spaces. And, don't be afraid to reach out to us. If you have questions, if you want more information about anything that we've talked about, this is a process. And it is important to know that we never know everything.
Oh, no.
No. We always have to have that, that hunger to learn and to grow, because that's how we will always become better in each areas of our work.
Yes.
So with that, thank you so much, Gigi. It was great to see you and great to spend some time with you.
Likewise, same with me to you.
Yes, and we will be back next month with another episode of Let's Talk About Race.
Thank you. Bye-bye.